One December morning, millions of Australians woke up to a new kind of internet. As of December 10, 2025, children under 16 are officially banned from having accounts on most major social media platforms.
This is the day when Australian families are taking back power from these big tech companies, and they're asserting the right of kids to be kids and for parents to have greater peace of mind.
TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, X, Facebook, Reddit, Twitch, Threads, Kick. All of them are switching off under 16 accounts for users in Australia. Supporters call it a world-first move to protect kids' mental health and safety. Critics say it is rushed, intrusive, and almost impossible to enforce. So what exactly has changed? Why has Australia done this? And what happens next? Let's start with what this ban actually is. Under a new law called the Online Safety Amendment, also known as the Social Media Minimum Age Act, social media companies are now required to stop anyone under 16 in Australia from creating or keeping an account on age-restricted platforms. This is not a slap on the wrist guideline. It is legally enforceable. The government's e-safety commissioner can fine platforms up to almost 50 million Australian dollars if they don't take what the law calls reasonable steps to keep under 16s off their services. Parents and children will not be fined. The responsibility and the punishment sits entirely with the companies. So what does this mean in practice? If you are under 16 in Australia, you're not supposed to have an account on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, X, Reddit, Threads, Twitch, or Kick. Some services have been exempted for now, like WhatsApp, Roblox, Pinterest, YouTube Kids, Google Classroom, and some messaging apps, but the list is under constant review. The platforms we normally think of as social, where you can follow people, post content, and build an audience, are the ones in the firing line. In the days leading up to the deadline, companies began quietly deactivating or locking accounts they believed belonged to younger teens. Many teenagers logged in this morning to find that their profiles simply no longer worked. The next big question is, how are these companies supposed to know who is under 16? That's where age verification comes in, and where the debate really heats up. Under the law, platforms have to use some mix of technology to estimate or verify a user's age. That might include facial age estimation using selfies or video, AI tools that guess age based on behavior and account history, or offering users the option to prove they are over 16 by uploading a government-issued ID or linking to a bank or phone account. The e-safety commissioner will audit and set standards for these systems and can demand reports from platforms on what they are doing. In theory, if a company does too little, it could be fined or even blocked in Australia. In reality, everyone, including the government, accepts that tech-savvy teenagers will try VPNs, false dates of birth, parents' IDs, and other workarounds. This is why ministers are describing it more as a delay to social media rather than a perfect, airtight ban. To understand why Australia has gone this far, we need to talk about what the government says is driving this law: youth mental health and online harm. Over the past decade and a half, Australia has seen sharp increases in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide among young people, especially girls. Government reports cite data showing mental disorders among young women rising by more than half since the late 2000s. Hospitalizations for self-harm increasing and suicide rates climbing in the 15 to 24 age group. Long-running surveys like HILDA show teenage mental health scores dropping significantly in the same years that social media use exploded. Researchers point to what they call a dose-response effect. The more hours teens spend online, particularly on social platforms, the more likely they are to report distress. On top of that, Australia's e-safety commissioner has documented a steep rise in online harms against young people. Almost half of teenagers report negative experiences online within 6 months. things like bullying, exclusion, being contacted by strangers, being sent sexual content, or being threatened. Reports of child sexual extortion and abuse materials have surged. Officials say most of these cases begin on mainstream social apps, especially Instagram and Snapchat. The government argues that algorithms optimized for engagement often push children towards more extreme content like self-harm posts, appearance-obsessed feeds, and violent or sexual material, and that under-16s are simply not equipped to handle that level of pressure and manipulation. That brings us to how this law actually came about. Before passing the ban, Australia held a parliamentary inquiry and a social media summit with researchers, child psychiatrists, parents, and platforms. Many experts warned that trying to moderate harmful content after the fact was not working. They pushed for more radical changes to how and when young people are exposed to social media in the first place. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese framed the decision starkly. In his words, "Too often social media is not social at all. Instead, it becomes a weapon for bullies, a driver of anxiety, a vehicle for scammers, and, in the worst cases, a tool for online predators." The government's message is simple. Childhood should not be designed around the needs of tech companies' algorithms. Of course, tech companies and digital rights advocates see things very differently. Meta, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, and others have criticized the law as heavy-handed, confusing, and in some cases dangerous. YouTube has warned that banning under-16s could push them into unregulated or darker corners of the internet where there's even less oversight. X, owned by Elon Musk, has suggested the rules could be used as a form of covert control over access to information. Digital rights groups say the biggest risk is normalizing surveillance. To verify ages, platforms may need to collect scans of faces or copies of IDs, creating massive databases of highly sensitive data that could be hacked or misused. They argue that in trying to protect children, the government may be building the infrastructure for lifelong tracking of everyone. Australian teens themselves are split. Some say they're relieved to get a break from constant comparison, bullying, and pressure to always be online. Others are worried about losing support networks, group chats, and spaces where they find community and rely on online platforms to connect with people like them.
We'd always regulated media in the public interest, and I think what the government's trying to do is to return some of the public interest. That's a good thing because, as I say, there have been harms. It's come internationally, it's come from other places. I think looking at questions around social media from an Australian perspective is a really good idea.
I think it cuts kids off from the community more than forcing them back out in real life. I think it just cuts them off from support as well that they could be accessing. They are now going to have to get their news only from traditional media, which has a particular bias that might be different from what they find online. So in general, I don't think this is a good thing.
For many families, social media is how grandparents see photos, how sports teams and schools communicate, and how young people organize their social lives. The government insists those functions can be replaced with messaging apps and other tools. Critics respond that the line between social media and messaging is already blurring, and kids will simply move to apps that are less safe and less visible. Legal challenges are already in motion. A Sydney-based internet rights group, the Digital Freedom Project, has launched a High Court case arguing that banning under-16s violates Australia's implied freedom of political communication and young people's right to participate in public debate. Reddit is preparing its own legal challenge, and other platforms are watching closely. The government says it will not be intimidated by big tech or lawsuits.
Let's be clear, that should come as no surprise. Across our history, when our governments have taken strong action to protect citizens against highly addictive, highly damaging products, they've usually been challenged in the courts by the companies that profit most from them. But the idea that this is some action by Reddit to protect the political freedoms of young people is a complete crock.
And points to opinion polls suggesting a larger majority of Australians support some form of ban or strict age limit. At the same time, ministers openly admit that enforcement will be messy at first. Finally, We need to look at why the world is watching this so closely. Australia is the first country to implement a nationwide under-16 social media ban that puts the legal burden squarely on platforms and threatens huge fines for failure. Some US states have tried to introduce age rules, but most have been stalled or watered down in court. The UK and the European Union have focused more on design rules and transparency requirements rather than outright bans. Now, countries like Malaysia, Denmark, New Zealand, and several European states are studying Australia's move as a possible model. If the ban is seen as workable and if it improves outcomes for kids, it could trigger a global shift in how governments regulate social media for young people. If it fails or drives children to riskier spaces, it may become a warning about the limits of legislating online childhood. So, as of December 2025, Australia has effectively booted children under 16 off mainstream social media and turned its young users into a test case for the rest of the world. Over the coming months and years, researchers will be watching. Do mental health trends improve? Does bullying decline? Do predators lose access or simply move platforms? And perhaps the hardest question of all, in a world where almost everything is online, what does it really mean to grow up without social media?